Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we are at the absolute favorite Torah portion of every bar mitzvah child who learns about their Torah portion. So you know my famous joke when the rabbis get together and we had our cabaret, that one person came up and we wrote a bunch of parodies, and one of my colleagues wrote a parody as the bar mitzvah child, singing Tazria, I've gotten the parsha Tazria. So, right, not a lot of people would laugh at that. Glad this room did. Yeah, right. In joke. Exactly right. So, the reason that is funny is because this is the parsha, this and Tazria-Metzora. We read them both, this week. It's a double parsha. They both deal with, skin affliction, a skin disease that also can be found, on fabric and on the walls of homes. It is called in Hebrew tzara'at. The person suffering from it is called the Metzora. So the one who has tzara'at. Tzara'at is translated as leprosy, as many of you know. So it is translated as leprosy. It is not leprosy. It is not Hansen's disease, because tzara'at gets better. Like it kind of comes and then you're quarantined and then it's watched and it often goes away. That is not the case with Hansen's disease. So even once they knew it was not Hansen's disease, the decision was made to keep the translation as leprosy. Y'all have been studying with me for a long time. Tell me why. Why was it kept as leprosy if that's not what it is? All right, doesn't matter that you've studied with me a long time, apparently.
It was something that people really didn't want to have.
So something that people really didn't want to have. There was an incredible stigma about leprosy for a very long time, particularly in the ancient world. So this is why you have leper colonies. This is why you had islands where they were dumped, so that it would not spread to other people.
Leprosy was known, and
right.
Whatever this is, wasn't.
So to Judah's point, everybody knew leprosy. Like you hear leprosy, you know, in our generation, polio, you hear that and there's an immediate visceral reaction. And it's a very common reaction. I mean, not common, but you know what I mean? Like everybody knows what you're talking about. So the decision was made to keep the, translation as it is, as leprosy. So just know that as we're reading, that's not what it is. We have the translation as it is. We know leprosy, obviously, nor can any skin disease in our experience. And the skin disease probably is more like psoriasis or eczema, right? Something where the skin turns white, the hair can turn white, it can spread. When you see it on clothing, most likely we're talking about mold. When you see it on the walls of a house, again, we're talking about mold or mildew. In the ancient world, of course, there was no way to know that those are different organisms, different things causing what looks like a similar eruption on skin, fabric, and the walls of a house. In each of these cases, skin is that which keeps stuff out and that which keeps stuff in, right? Like I just had blood drawn for my annual physical, and it's like, I don't know about y'all, but like I have to take such a deep breath and like get my head in a space for that to happen. And it's not because it's so painful. I mean, this one was particularly painful. Look at that bruise. But it's not about the pain, right? It's about that feeling of this is just so wrong, because your veins are there to keep stuff out and to keep other stuff in. And that is a barrier that is not supposed to be crossed, right? And your brain kind of knows this is really, really wrong, like on all kinds of levels. And so that's the understanding of skin. It keeps stuff in, it keeps stuff out. It is the barrier between our innards and the outer world. It is what protects us from the outer world. It is what can also demonstrate the effect of the outer world on us. If you get poison ivy, you've had contact with the outer world that we can identify. If you have a mosquito bite, it's a symptom of an interaction with the outer world. We also have acne. We have other things that are clearly an expression of something happening in the inner world that that is shown on the skin. So both our interaction with the outer world appears on our skin sometimes, and what's happening for us in our inner life also shows on the outer surface of the skin, right? So that is one way that we understand all this kind of talk about the skin. And the rabbis have a lot to do with playing with or. Ayin, Vav, Resh. Ayin, Vav, Resh is skin. Aleph, Vav, Resh is light. They play with this a lot. So or and or. Okay. So that's about skin. Clothing also, right, I want a different word than barrier. What am I trying to, is a boundary, right, between my person, my body, and the outer world, and my body, right? So clothing functions very much like skin, as does the walls of a house, right? It's what keeps you in, it keeps you safe from the outer world, the elements of the outer world, and stuff from within the house in the Israelite understanding can also manifest on that boundary, just like it does on skin. And as they understood it, also on clothing. Okay? So for them, in the ancient, and I'm unpacking this some because otherwise it's very hard for us to get in the mindset of what's happening in this parsha. When there is a disruption internally, that is expressed externally on the skin, the boundary between my inner self and the outer world. When there's a disruption in my life, that's going to show up possibly on the clothing I wear that is the boundary between me, my body, and the everything outside my body. Or it might show up on the walls of my home, which is the boundary between my family and the larger community. Yeah? So for them, those are absolutely related. It's the same. These are different ways that a disruption in the field is manifested. For both ancient Israel and the rabbis, that disruption is not physical. I want to be very clear about that. It is not understood to be physical. It is understood to be a disruption in the spiritual field that manifests as physical. The same way physicians will tell people under a huge amount of stress, your cardiac numbers are coming in crappy, and it's not because of what you're eating, right? We know this. We know there's a connection between our physical manifestation of other disruptions or stresses or problems, issues that manifest physically but are not physical in origin. It's dis-ease. And this is what the Israelites understood, and the rabbis take it and run with it. They go, woof, like way out of the, park with it. We're going to stay with ancient Israel this time. We've done the rabbinic interpretations before, but we're going to stay with the biblical understanding and looking at it from Zornberg's perspective, because I'm committed to bringing you stuff that's interesting and different than what we've looked at. I've not seen these interpretations before, so I learned these, so I'm bringing them to you because it was very exciting to have a new interpretation. For those of you who are studying this for the first time, it's also lovely. But for those of us who have done Sara'at a lot, it's really nice to have, right, a new set of insights into a portion of what's going on with this. Okay, so before we look at the Torah text, one more point. Purity and impurity were understood to be the operative two categories in ancient Israel, with the Mishkan and with the temple in place. Purity and impurity were just states of being. They were just states of being, but there are very strict observances that go with the state of being impure, so that you don't bring impurity in places that need to be preserved as pure. So that was a big concern, was impurity spreading in the camp, not sara'at. It's the impurity that they were worried would spread. Okay? Because once you have sara'at, you are impure. And so, but if people don't know, if you have it all over your back and you're wearing a, four-cornered long thing, people don't know you have it, so they don't know you're impure. you may not know you're impure, right? So the fear that you'll hear in the text or in the treatment of it is about the impurity spreading through the camp. And so when you look at the diagnosis of tzaraat, and Zorenberg really points this out, which I'm not sure I ever really paid attention to before, is that it's almost impossible to keep track of if there's a white blah blah blah, then you're impure. But if there's a white spot within the blah blah blah, then you're pure. So it's like, wait, so does white cause impurity or purity? Well, it turns out both. Right. And then if there's a white hair, but there's not other, so it's almost impossible to keep track of what's going on symptomatically and how that lines up with whether that means you're pure or impure. So we're not exactly sure anything about how this actually would have been, right, diagnosed and dealt with.
Sorry, if it's a medical disease, if it's not a medical disease and a spiritual disease, why is it contagious? Or I guess
impurity is contagious always.
Okay.
Always. Impurity is by definition contagious. Vessels, you can't pour from an impure vessel into a pure vessel. You contaminate the pure vessel. Unless it's stone. Right? I mean, so there's lots of literature about in the temple, how you protected against impurity spreading. Okay. It's an obsession, right? Like for the rabbis, it becomes obsessive the way they talk about it. And it translates over into kashrut. Right? Can you eat on earthenware, milk, and then meat? No, because it will transfer. But stone is not porous, so it won't, right? So there's just this, so that's where we see vestiges of this system of purity and impurity and cross-contamination, which was a very serious concern. Because what can't dwell in a space of purity? God. Impurity. Yes, correct. Okay. So now we're going to look at a little bit of the text. So this is how we start a lot of stuff. So God says to Moshe and Aharon, 13:1, when a person has on the skin of the body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection on the skin of the body, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons, the priest. This is not dealt with by medical personnel. This is dealt with by the priests. Why? It's a spiritual dis-ease. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of the body. Okay, here we go. If hair in the affected patch has turned white and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of the body, it is tzaraat. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce the person impure. But if it is a white discoloration on the skin of the body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall conduct an examination. And if the affection has remained unchanged in color and the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate that person for another 7 days. So this is 2-week quarantine if there's no change. On the 7th day, the priest shall again conduct an examination. If the affection has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce the person pure. It is a rash, meaning like you may have bumped into poison ivy. After washing those clothes, that person shall be pure. But if the rash, so if they didn't have tzaraat and it was just a rash, you wash your clothes and you're considered pure. But if the rash should spread on the skin after the person has been seen by the priest and pronounced pure, that person shall again report to the priest. And if the priest sees that the rash has spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce that person impure. It is tzaraat. When a person has a scaly affection, it shall be reported to the priest. If the priest finds on the skin a white swelling which has turned some hair white with a patch of undiscolored flesh in the swelling, it is chronic tzaraat on the skin of the body, and the priest shall pronounce the person impure. Being impure, that person need not be isolated. If the eruption spreads out over the skin so that it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, that the priest can see, if the priest sees that the eruption has covered the whole body, he shall pronounce as pure the affected person who is pure from having turned all white. You see how this makes no sense. But as soon as undiscolored flesh appears in it, that person shall be impure. When the priest sees the undiscolored flesh, he shall pronounce the person impure. The undiscolored flesh is impure. It is tzaraat. But if the undiscolored flesh again turns white, that person shall come to the priest, and the priest shall conduct an examination. If the affection has turned white, the priest shall pronounce as pure the affected person, who is then pure. When an inflammation appears on the skin of one's body and it heals, and a white swelling or a white discoloration streaked with red develops where the inflammation was, that person shall report to the priest. If the priest finds that it appears lower than the rest of the skin and that the hair in it has turned white, the priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is tzara'at that is broken out in the inflammation. But if the priest finds that there's no white hair in it and is no lower than the rest of the skin and is faded, the priest shall isolate that person for 7 days. If it should spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is nega. But if the discoloration remains stationary, not having spread, it is the scar of the inflammation. The priest shall pronounce the person pure. When the skin of one's body sustains a burn by fire and the patch from the burn is a discoloration, either white streaked or with red or white, the priest shall examine it. If some hair has turned white in the discoloration, which itself appears to go deeper than the skin, it is tzara'at that is broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is tzara'at. But if the priest finds that there's no white hair in the discoloration that is not lower than the rest of the skin and it is faded, the person shall be isolated for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest. Okay, so you get the idea. This goes on and on and on. Yes, George.
Were there any kind of physicians at some point that the priest would refer?
I don't know the answer to that question. Yes, there were people who were medical. They were healers, right? Yeah. There were people who understood herbs and things you put on burns. What are those called? I'm thinking solvents, but that's not the word. Yes. I swear to God, I'm worried about my brain. Salve, right? They know about those things. They're experts in those things. That is not what they understood to be the treatment for this.
Okay. Even if it continues.
It's not, that is not the issue. The issue is not a medical problem.
It's a spiritual problem.
Correct. If it's tzara'at, it's a medical problem. We're not told what they do. If it's just a regular burn that's not healing, I would assume they know to go to somebody who can help with the physical issue of that burn not healing.
Sounds to me like the priest can make a lot of money on this.
So the priest makes nothing on these visits. The priest is supported by sacrifice. The priest is supported by people bringing offerings. That is a conversation that some folks have about the sacrificial system and who brings what offerings. There is a lot in the literature, well, not a lot, but I have found some stuff in the literature that talks about there was an agenda by the priests to say, here's when you bring a shlamim, here's when you bring a chatat, here's when you need to bring an asham, here's when you need to bring whatever, and that there was a motivation to make more money by having more stake, right? You get more of your provisions provided by the people, the more they are required to bring sacrifice, to Mark's point. Okay, but that is a fairly cynical view, which I happen to share, that probably there was a lot of that going on, right? In the battle of, when this gets codified, who codifies when you bring what sacrifice? Okay, so, but in this case, and to Mark's point, they do not make any money. They do not get anything for this, the priests. It is interesting to me that it is the priest, the high priest, who deals with this. The person is in isolation. The high priest, the most important functional role mitigating the relationship between the people Israel and the divine, leaves the Mishkan and goes to the person's apartment to check on them. It is very interesting that as horrible as the thought of getting tzara'at was, who's in charge of dealing with it and looking at it and seeing what it is and seeing if it's better and seeing if it's spread is the most important person mitigating the relationship between Israel and the divine. I find that fascinating. How many of you have tried to get an appointment with a doctor because something's going on, right? They're too busy, too important, and I'm not saying they think that, you know what I'm saying, but it's like we've put them in a category of they're very hard to access.
I beg your pardon, please.
Yeah, it's okay, Bob. It's okay. So right, We know your schedules. But the point is, the high priest, this was one of the most important things, it appears, because it was counted on that the person would report it to the priest and they would be examined, right? There are people who can't get into Z position when they're sick. But what does that say about priorities? Clearly, it was a priority, or at least according to the authors of this text, it was considered a priority that these people be treated and seen and addressed and dealt with, and not just left out there until the priest can get there.
My question is about the priority of this entire text, because it's gotten almost as much attention as the building of the Mishkan.
Yeah, right.
And I wonder why the importance is so great, granted that it's a spiritual affliction.
So you tell me.
I'm thinking, I think there's some very primitive philosophy at work here, as in many cultures. When somebody has some kind of a physical affliction, they blame it on something else going on.
But if they accept that it's a spiritual something going on, why would it get so much attention?
I think they can't afford any contamination in a delicate place.
Correct. If we thought something was spiritually upsetting and we could catch it, might not we make that a huge, important part of our culture, is to make sure people are protected from it, right? So I think it's natural that if it's something that's like, like this is massively disruptive, then you want to contain it and you want to deal with it because it is an absolute danger to the health of the community. But beyond that, because if God can't dwell among the people, what happens? It ain't just spiritual. What happens? They can be defeated by their enemies, right? I mean, it's survival. It's dealing with the survival of the clan.
One of the things that strikes me about this, about the multitude of different and contradictory manifestations of the internal dysfunction, the internal spiritual dysfunction, is that there is an implicit notion that the impurity that is within is something that is, in a sense, very devious. It manifests in a variety of different ways and has to be constantly guarded against, which, that's pretty obvious, I think. But the sense that it is constantly coming from within the person and constantly disguising itself and operating in very unexpected ways that have to be ascertained in these odd ways by the priest, I think says something about the sense of what goes on within and what the relationship with the divine is for.
Yeah. So I just want to push a little bit on devious. So I know what you're saying, that like it's so confusing and it's so kind of tricky. I'll give you tricky. But remember, it's thought to be the behavior of the person. This is not random. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's Torah, it's not what's devious. It's right. I mean, and I don't even want to say that they would think that about a person, but it's like you have to be vigilant as a people so that Sarah doesn't show up.
Right, and the vigilance, I think, is really vital because it shows up in so many different ways and in such unexpected ways that it makes itself known.
But the vigilance is not about stuff that is tricky. It's clear. Here's Torah law. Follow Torah law or else. It's not tricky. Diagnosing Sara'at might be tricky. So it might show up in really kind of, interesting ways to try to figure out, is it or isn't it, or is it or isn't it? But the human behavior is very clear. Here are the laws, follow the laws or else. Right. Okay. So,
Amy,
so let's go.
Amy,
Yes.
Amy, isn't the salient point here, the issue of spread? Whether we look at it as external or internal, spiritual and psychological. The issue is the spread through the entire people.
The
And
spread
I
of
think-
impurity.
Correct. And
That
I
is the
think,
concern.
right, absolutely. And this is just an outward manifestation
Correct.
of the potential of that spread.
Correct. Yes.
I'm
And
a little
yes.
concerned too about those of us who have white hair.
Yeah. Yours is naturally white. It is not tzara'at. It is not a concern. You are pure.
By the way,
Yay.
Amy, there's
Right?
a condition called vitiligo.
Yes, correct.
which
So
is
we're
white.
sure it's a class. It's part of that kind of class of, yes, of skin issues. All right. So as for the person who has tzara'at, the clothes shall be rent, the head shall be left bare, and the upper lip shall be covered over. And that person shall call out tameh, tameh, impure, impure. Zorenberg has a lot to say about this from the Midrashim. The person shall be impure as long as the disease is present. Being impure, that person shall dwell apart in a dwelling outside the camp. Now it moves on to, and I just want to do one sentence of this because we're going to get commentary on it. When an eruptive affection occurs in cloth of wool or linen fabric, in the warp or in the woof of the linen or the wool, or in a skin or in anything made of skin, if the affection in the cloth of the skin, in the warp or the woof, or in any article of skin is streaky green or red, it is an eruptive affection. It shall be shown to the priest. And the priest, after examining the affection, shall isolate the affected article for 7 days, right? Then we go on through like how this is dealt with, right? And that's where I want to stop there. The only thing I want to do in Metzora is verse 33. This is going on and on and on and on and on and on and on of what's happening and how the priest is dealing with some of this and mitigating some of this. God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, Ki tavo el eretz Canaan asher ani noten lachem. So la'achuzah, when you come to the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, v'natati negat sara'at, and I give the eruptive affection of sara'at on a house in the land that you possess, then the owner of the house shall come to the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared on my house. We're going to look at commentary on this. When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, v'natati negat sara'at, and I give you the eruption of sara'at on a house, then the owner will come and tell the priest. All right, we're going to get a lot of commentary on what this means. Remember, the rabbis are looking always, and Zorenberg's always looking, any commentator worth their salt is looking past the pshat. They're looking past the simple explanation that sounds like, when you come to the land of Canaan, and you have a house, and there's sara'at, and that is not what's going on here, suggest our commentators who look very carefully, right, at this, which was why we're here, because we love that. Don't we love that? We love that. Okay. So let's take a look at what is some of the commentary. So most of this, except the last piece, is brought by Aviva Zorenberg in her new book, The Hidden Order of Intimacy. Tzara'at as a category of issues from the human body is set apart from impurity originating in the world outside. Here, impurity originates not in consumption or in contact with the world. Rather, it emerges from the unknown interior of the body onto the body's surface. It progresses through time. Its progress through time is a significant factor in diagnosis. Symptoms appear on the skin, that sensitive envelope that separates the body contents from the outside world. The skin is a liminal area, which makes the ancient world very nervous. Liminal spaces make the ancient world and the rabbis very nervous because it's not this or that, right? It's not clear. And that's crazy making for people who are obsessed with taxonomy, in which are registered both inner malaises, meaning the skin, physical and emotional, and reactions to the outside world. It is a responsive organ, reacting to food, touch, climate, to attractions and repulsions, fears and pleasures. The Hebrew word for skin is or in these Torah passages. It is often called or bisoro, the skin of his flesh, meaning the skin of your meat. It functions as a porous barrier between inside and outside. The Hebrew evokes alertness, responsiveness, vitality. The pathology of tzara'at, in which the skin is bleached of color, is associated with death. So Zornberg here looks at the etymology of the Hebrew word or, skin. Barry, how do you say to be awake in Hebrew? I know it's ayin resh, but give me the actual infinitive.
Lihiyot er.
Lihiyot er, to be awake. So is awake. Or, says Zornberg, skin is referring to the fact that it is alive, it is awake, it is responsive, it is it's about vitality, right? When you're healthy, and I'm sure they had this instinct in the ancient world. When people are healthy, their skin looks good. When people look yellow or whatever, right, or red, it's like something, you can tell something about what's going on. And what she's suggesting is, so if that's about awake, vital, responsive, then when it's white, it's about death, like some kind of, and remember, impurity is considered to be death in life. That's why it is so terrifying. It is anti-life. Impurity can be anti-life. Okay. So she's bringing 1347. She's bringing this verse that says, when an eruptive affection occurs in a cloth of wool or linen fabric, which we read, in the warp or the woof, blah, 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 blah. And she gives us Ramban, not Ramban, Nachmanides says, so he goes on, and it's a very long commentary, as you can see, and I even cut half of it off for you. Okay. She brings Ramban, who says, this is not a natural order of things, nor does it happen in the world outside of Israel. And similarly, leprosy of houses is not a natural phenomenon. So Ramban is saying, this is not something that just exists in the world and shows up. It only happens in the land of Israel. When Israel is wholly devoted to God, then God's spirit is upon them, always to maintain their bodies, clothes, and houses in good appearance. Thus, as soon as one of them commits a sin or a transgression, a deformity appears in his flesh or on his garment or in his house, revealing that God has turned aside from them. It is for this reason that Scripture states, and I shall put the plague of leprosy in a house of the land of your possession. We just read that pasuk. We just read that, what's it in English? Sentence. Meaning that it is God's punishment upon that house. This is a rabbinic interpretation. Thus, the law of leprosy of houses applies only in the land which is the inheritance of the eternal God. Right? And we just read the verse, when you come to the land of Canaan, which I give you for a possession. Now, the reason why this law does not apply outside the land of Israel is not because it is a duty which attaches to the ground, but the reason is because this matter of divine vindication of sins occurs only in the chosen land, wherein the glorious name dwells. And in the Torah Kohanim, the sages further interpreted that a house does not contract impurity until after the conquest and division of the land. That's why that sentence says, after you conquer the land, there is no tzara'at when the Canaanites are there, because God's presence is not there. It's the Israelites who then build the place where my name shall dwell. That's what brings the divine presence into Israel. Once the divine presence is there and people are living in order, in line with the divine understanding of what is expected of them, only then can tzara'at occur, when there is a disruption in that way of living in line with what God wants, right? The reason for this law is that only then do they have the ease of mind to know that the eternal and the divine glory dwells among them. And by way of the simple meaning of Scripture, the reason why it repeats in every verse the expression, the garment or the skin or the warp or the woof, is because the matter is miraculous. Tzara'at is a miracle that can only happen in the land of Israel after the Israelites have conquered it and are presumed to be living with an understanding of fulfilling the divine expectation of their society.
So given this explanation, now I'm getting a little irritated with the word leprosy.
With what?
Leprosy is a translation, because I think that's caused so much confusion, because leprosy, as we know, is an actual disease, right? I mean, in the ancient, and people have known about it. So what the hell? Like,
when people cuss at Torah study, it's like, yes, we have gotten them fully involved.
So I think that's caused so much misunderstanding.
Yeah. Well, certainly a simplification that does not appreciate, right, the complexity of what's going on here.
Right. I mean, if it's that, given this interpretation, like, just don't call it leprosy.
Yeah. So it's an interesting. So I'm curious to know. I wish I could just read the minds quickly of everybody who's really cares about the translation of this text and see how many would agree that leprosy now probably shouldn't be do you know what I mean? Okay, so we have people in here who say, yeah, change it. Like, doesn't work, because it used to work because of the stigma associated with it, but in a way, the stigma being caused by what makes you have the stigma of leprosy is not what's going on here.
As we're talking about all this in translation, it comes to my mind or a question that I have, how do you as a rabbi or other rabbis have a conversation with a teenager or somebody who is studying for a bar bat mitzvah and this is their portion?
We talk a lot about the stigma that comes with being physically otherized. We talk about COVID. We talk about HIV. I used to talk about HIV. These kids don't know from a time when that was so stigmatized. But I used to talk about HIV. We still talk about, like, they can talk about COVID. They can talk about the fear. They can talk about somebody who's physically different, and we talk a lot about the fear of that people react to people who are different by. So that's usually where we go.
Not to be silly, but the reason I asked this is many, many years ago, this was the portion I had in my bat mitzvah.
Mm-hmm.
And all the conversations made absolutely no sense to me.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about, but we also talk about, well, at least I do. I can't speak for what Rabbi Sher does, but what I also focus with them about is the priest, that the most important person in the society was the one checking. So it's the opposite message of, because you have this, yes, they were isolated, but they were not shunned and they were not ignored. The most important person in the camp was the one checking on them. And there's a huge public ritual to bring them back into the community. And it's a beautiful ritual. And then sometimes I talk with them about people who have cancer. You can tell because they've lost their hair and they wear a scarf and whatever. It's like, where's the ritual to bring people back from that state of feeling other and not typical or normal for that period of time? Because you're just not when you're being poisoned so that you can survive. And so any of us who have been ill and have felt kind of otherized or compromised and so feel otherized, what do we as a society have a way to bring people back publicly and acknowledge that and celebrate that? And we don't have it. So those are some of the ways I talk with them about it, is that the Israelite message is the opposite, that even though it was the most scary thing you could get, the priest went to your house, went in your house, touched you. Rather than, oh, we can't go near them because they were exposed to COVID and we're not going anywhere near their house and we're not, does that make sense? So that's some of where I go with them. Okay. Let's look at Zornberg on this verse that we just read. You remember what Ramban just said? Only happens in the land of Israel after it's been conquered and divided. Yeah? Up. This blotch on skin or clothing or housing indicates a disorder in the spiritual world. Such a situation in which physical symptoms directly indicate spiritual disorder is a unique dispensation, paradoxically, a kind of gift. And she looks at that sentence that I pointed out to you. I shall give you the plague of Tzara. Ramban emphasizes the connection with the Holy Land, not because of any particular agricultural commandment, but because the chosen land is the site of God's presence. In this heightened atmosphere, human misdeeds register directly. Furthermore, he cites Torah Kohanim, the Torah of the priests, to the effect that Sarat on houses appears only after the land has been fully conquered and apportioned, only when each recognizes what is his, only in a state of Yishuv Hada'at, a return of a deep understanding of the divine, of general social and cultural order, is the individual capable of, quote, knowing God. And only in such a condition can Sarat manifest itself. In a nation finely tuned to holiness, individual disruptions will register in the aesthetics of skin and clothes and walls. When the baseline of spiritual life is set high, the Tzara'at phenomenon becomes a privilege. It constitutes a miracle. So I've never heard about it talked about this way. I think it's a really deep insight that she brings from the traditional commentary. That is, it's a gift for you to know with a very clear outward manifestation that there is a disruption in the field. It is only folks living close to the divine presence with an awareness of what the divine wants. It's only a people living in line with that that's going to have an outward manifestation of a disruption of that relationship. Nowhere else does that happen because they are not living like that, right? The pagans, according to ancient Israel. To understand it as a miracle is to understand it as a kind of gift. And then when I started really thinking about that, it's like, it's kind of what David was just saying. Like, what if we really did have a sign that erupted on our clothes or our skin or the wall over there that really did indicate a disruption in the spiritual field? As scary as that might be, it also then has this whole course of treatment, and that when the treatment is done, you're pure, everything is copacetic, everything's back to okayness. And I'm kind of appreciating that. I guess that is a weird sort of gift.
But then how do you avoid thinking that someone who is sick has caused it themselves and that they're being punished by God?
Well, you wouldn't avoid that. You would say, clearly something's going on with Dana. And Dana or somebody else, like George, but Dana and George are not to be ignored because of that. They are to be tended to do whatever is necessary to bring them back to the community in a state of purity. And I just kind of wish, first of all, I wish this was true. It's not. It's obviously an ancient understanding of some physical phenomenon, but there's a tiny little part of me that wishes something would go, look, aim, pay attention, right? Disruption in the field, right? You need to go check in with your spiritual counselor, right? You need an appointment with your rabbi.
So some people think that illness kind of is that, you did, there's some sort of alignment that you're out of. And so being ill in any sense would point to you do need to check in. And so what would you say to that?
I would say that there's a very complicated relationship between our psychological, emotional, spiritual selves and our physical selves, and we do not understand it. Right? There's some stuff that's mostly physical. Hives might be physical because you touch something you're allergic to, or it might be, right, related to some kind of serious anxiety so and I think any physician here would agree with me. We don't know. We just don't understand all the ways that those things interact. I think what we do know is that there is a relationship, and we don't know the proportions always. We don't know the proportion of heart disease being caused by non-physical or physical. We don't know, because people can eat the same thing, but because of a different orientation or different genetics, they react differently in terms of what it does to their heart. Remember that there was a book called Zebras Don't Get Heart Attacks, or zebras don't get something about their hearts. And it's about monkeys. They took monkeys who had exactly the same diet, lived in exactly the same place, lived exactly in the same troop, and where they were on the social strata was completely different in terms of how much buildup they had in their heart. What is it? The bad stuff, that builds up here? No. Plaque. They had same diet, same behaviors, same troop, same everything. The higher the monkey was on the social ladder, the less plaque was in their artery. So we know there's a relationship, but we just don't know like where that ratio is. So my big pet peeve is when people want to make some kind of statement about, well, if you would just let go of your anger, you wouldn't have cancer. You wouldn't have heart disease, right? That's when I get really crazy, because what you're doing is the opposite of this. You are blaming the victim and saying, if you just change something about who you are, you wouldn't have this dis-ease. And while a part of that may be true, that yes, we need to be in alignment and all those ways that are really important, it does not mean you won't get sick. And it doesn't mean you won't get heart disease, right? So, and someone I knew who was a massage therapist and does, Reiki and does with the needles, acupuncture, all that stuff, was always told me that the reason 6 million died in the Holocaust was because their souls needed to move to a higher vibration. When she had a minor heart attack, I was like, do not open your mouth, because what the temptation was to go, if you'd have just let go of your anger, right? But because it just is dismissive of people's suffering, is to say it's your fault.
It seems to me that the lack that many of us have is that of a spiritual counselor. And perhaps that's the reason we come here, because we feel that this is spiritual counseling.
Right. That this is a therapeutic session, right? That's preventive, hopefully, right? Hopefully we don't need too much curative, but like when it's necessary, hopefully we can deal with that too. All right. So I'm going to skip this one.
Amy, okay. Are you yes. giving the 50-minute hour, and charging fees for your spiritual counseling?
The priest did not get paid. The priest got paid with food. So anybody who feels so moved.
I'm not asking you about the priest.
Lisa feeds us, right? Lisa feeds us with the muffins that we get at Torah study. You only get if you come in person. Okay. So I want to go to this part that is about the person tearing their clothes, covering their upper lip, and having to announce impure, impure. So this can seem really kind of yucky. This could seem a little cruel. Like they have to walk through the streets identifying themselves by their clothing so everyone can see that, and by shouting out impure, impure. Now, lots of commentators agree this was necessary because you can't see the tzara'at on the person. And so the person is warning people, I have COVID, spiritual COVID, right? And you don't want to catch that. Like, we don't want this to spread. So move out of the way, because you become a vessel now, right? For impurity. I'm very interested in what Zornberg brings as other commentary. Rashi, our most famous commentator, does say that that's one of the reasons, but look at the other reason he says. And he shall call out unclean, unclean. He must proclaim aloud that he is unclean, so that people may keep, this is not what I wanted. Okay. I put the wrong thing on here. But he brings Moed Katan, a piece of Torah. And what does Moed Katan say about why he's calling out unclean, unclean? The Gemara asks, but with regard to this verse, does it come to teach this idea that verse is needed for that which is taught in the following Baraita? And he shall cry impure, impure. This teaches that the leper must inform the public of his distress, and the public will pray for mercy on his behalf. So Rashi's bringing the Talmud that says it's not about get out of the way so you don't get impure and spread it through the camp. That's not the point. It is about saying I'm impure so that everyone who hears that will feel moved to pray for you. All right. So and this goes on, which is just beautiful. The cry of the leper communicates not the public health hazard he represents, but his sheer pain. In this reading, it is a religious requirement to affect others. so that they will pray for him in his suffering. His desolation creates a connection with others whose compassion is stirred. I love this. The cry of the sufferer interrupts, appeals, demands. The one who hears him must ask for compassion. This is an ethical moment. Whether or not, and she's talking about mirror neurons, whether or not neurons are at work, the moment assumes the reality of compassion-suffering with the other who is apart from one. The voice of the badad, badad means very alone, right? You're isolated, you're alone. The voice of the badad condition strikes a common chord with remote others. Moreover, the leper should proclaim his pain in public so that the many, the rabbim, will hear and ask for compassion. The public sphere is strangely recreated in this uncanny scene. The leper does not ask for compassion, but he knows there is a world of others who will respond by themselves asking for divine compassion. That is an incredibly beautiful shift. Now, the Talmud in Chulin continues. She brings another place where we see this, and that is in Genesis. Remember, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are completely different creation narratives. We've talked about this a lot in here, yes? So we accept that. We get that. But the rabbis have to harmonize those, don't they? They have a problem when Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 don't match. So there's a lot of ink spilled on trying to make them match. One of those places is, and the earth brought forth grass on the third day of the week. Genesis 1. That's that creation narrative. But if you look at Genesis 2, on the third day of the week, what does it say? No shrub of the field was yet in the earth. Well, those don't match. But no problem. We're going to get the explanation. On Shabbat Eve, the sixth day of creation, immediately before Adam was created, Rav Asi explains, this teaches that the grasses emerged on the third day and stood at the opening of the ground. But they did not grow until Adam, the first human, came and prayed for mercy upon them. And then what happened? Rain came and they sprouted. And this is meant to teach you that the Holy One, blessed be God, desires the prayers of the righteous. Okay, I'm not going to give you meaning because she does a much more beautiful job of it than I will. This is a story about God's desire for the moment of bakashat rachamim, when a human being asks for compassion. Here we return to the midrash about the cry of the leper and the response of those who hear it. The expression implies that the human being asks not for a thing. God, my phone doesn't always catch every letter and translate it correctly. The expression implies that the human being in bakashat rachamim asks not for a thing, but for a non-thing, rachamim, mercy. Compassion arises in the matrixial embrace. My psychoanalytic people. Compassion arises in the matrixial embrace, experienced in and symbolized by the womb. Because remember, rachamim comes from rechem, womb. Compassion is a connectedness that is also a kind of border crossing. Baby and mother. That is a border crossing and is the source of responsibility and care. The voice of prayer acts like a touch in the womb. When the baby moves in the womb, mom responds. Borders can be crossed without being removed entirely. I and non-I are always linked in the matrixial, meaning I don't just respond to the baby when it's inside me as a mother. I respond to that baby when it's come to the other side of the boundary, the other side of the border. I am always related to the baby, the child, in the matrixial relation, right? In that world, there's always a relationship between I and non-I. To ask for compassion is to be possessed by this connection in difference. The connection in difference. That is the point. She's going to go on. This matrixial state is experienced as vulnerable, even helpless, right? The infant is helpless, as we know. Both Adam in a dry world and the leper disconnected from the vital energies that hold the social world together discovered this state. Connection in difference. Rachamim evokes not only the womb, but its linkage with the breast that suckles and nurtures life. It is striking that in Rabbinic Hebrew, the verb rachem, to have compassion, becomes the technical expression for suckling in animal and human life. It is used without self-consciousness as a concrete analog to its metaphorical usage as compassion. Without this instinctual movement of active interlacing of mother and child, the world could not continue because we're born helpless. Perhaps something like this is also true of the human and the divine in the position of prayer. In Aramaic translation, the rachem root represents simply love. Bert and Mark, this goes to our conversation last night, where someone said to me, Phil Canoff said there's a big difference between empathy and love. And I'm going to send this to him because this I'd already read before that class, which is for the rabbis, no. They use that term interchangeably. For the rabbis, rachem actually means love. It's an evolution. It starts as meaning compassion or empathy. It moves in their language. Languages change very quickly. In their language, rachem becomes one of the words for love, that they're not so different for the rabbis, which I think is an important point. Because we see a big difference in those things. And I think it's an important point that for the rabbis, they don't see those as so different. I know we have to close. I want to get to Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg.
Can you just quickly reiterate rachamim,
rachamim,
all the difference in that root word from womb to love to, it means mercy.
Rachem comes from womb, rechem. What one feels for the issue of one's womb is, now you figure out what English word you want to put on that. But the sense is, it is unearned. It is unearned. There's nothing a baby can do to earn what we feel for them. It just is, hopefully. And in the normal state of things, it exists, and it is evoked by the infant, without it earning that. It doesn't do anything, right? You can't earn rachamim. You can earn love or whatever, but you can't earn rachamim or chen, grace. Neither one of those can be earned. It is freely given. Okay? Let's look at Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, who I got this because she wrote a book called God Loves the Stranger, which we got a couple of pages from in our women's mindfulness cohort this week. And this jumped off the page as totally connecting to what we just said. The collective. Sometimes I cannot connect to any of the above, meaning stuff she's been talking about, or any of the other skillful tools that help lift me or remind me that my life is not permanently stuck on the down dial. Sometimes, maybe often, I cannot lift myself up. But you, my friend, my teacher, comrade, colleague, fellow seeker, you can. I call out and you answer. You remind me that I am not always like this. You remind me that I have had other moments and I will again. You remind me that this happened before, and remember, in your presence, I am no longer alone. I am no longer separate. The very exchange of our breath reminds me that my borders are far more permeable than I suppose. I have chills. An incredibly beautiful contemporary. She's not talking about Sarah. This is not a commentary on our Torah portion. This is just a book on mindfulness and Jewish approaches to living in a mindful way. And it's like, so it hasn't changed from Zornberg and Ramban's interpretation of what the Metzora needs is that matrixial connection in difference when one feels and is experiencing badad, being alone, being other, being outside. What one needs is some way, right, to know that one is connected to the broader whole, that I wasn't always like this, I am not always like this, and I won't always be, and I am connected even in my otherness, even in my aloneness, and that we all need that. That is what we are to be to each other, talking about spiritual refuah, spiritual healing and treatment. that's what hopefully we come here for. To this clinic, we come to get a little shot of this that really is one of the only things that heals our very human existential aloneness, which is not a dis-ease. It is the way things are. Sometimes that bothers us more than others, or scares us more than others, or we're aware of it more than others. And this is always a booster to get us through, right? Dealing with that, knowing that we are part of this amazing collective.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.